Welcome all. Today marks the last day of our public hearings on child protection and criminal justice. Before we start, I would like to ask Commissioner Hunter to do Welcome to Country.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands of the Wurundjeri, pay my respects to elders, past and present, acknowledge all those that have come before us so we're able to give voice here today, and may Bunja watch over us as we conduct Aboriginal business. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hunter. Council.
Thank you, Chair. My name is McAvoy and I appear with my learner junior, Ms Fitzgerald, for the purpose of taking the next witnesses through their evidence. This morning we have Professor Stuart Kinner and Dr Mick Creety. They're in the witness box. I also note Scarifello is appearing for the state.
Welcome.
We only have these two witnesses today, Chair, and it's intended, it was originally intended that we conclude these witnesses in an hour. My observation of their evidence is that they have a wealth of knowledge, and we might go past that to make sure we cover the issues that they're able to speak to and extract as much of their many of their insights as we can, if that's okay with the Commission.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, yes.
I call Professor Stuart Kinner and Dr Mick Creety. I might first start with you, Professor Kinner, if you could just say your full name for the purpose of the record.
Stuart Alistair Kinner. And
you've provided an outline of evidence to the Commission, and the contents of that outline are true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, they are.
And do you undertake to tell the truth to this Commission in the evidence you're about to give?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Dr Creety, could you tell the Commissioners your full name, please?
Michael Brian Creety.
And you've also prepared an outline of evidence for this inquiry?
Correct.
And the contents of that outline of evidence are true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Correct.
And do you undertake to tell the truth in the evidence you're about to give to this Commission?
I do.
Thank you. Starting first with Professor Kinner, could you just give the Commission a brief explanation of the roles that you currently hold and the basis on which you're appearing today?
Sure. So my qualifications, I have a PhD in forensic psychology from the University of Queensland in 2004. But for a little over 20 years now, I've led a program of research on the health of people who have contact with the criminal justice system, initially in Queensland, but more broadly now around Australia as well as internationally. I'm Professor of Health Equity at Curtin University, but also head the Justice Health Unit at the University of Melbourne and at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. And I'm an adjunct professor at the Griffith Criminology Institute at Griffith University. I also serve on the WHO's Health and Prison Program Steering Group and the Worldwide Prison Health Research and Engagement Network Steering Committee, so I have those global connections, and I'm inaugural chair of Australia's National Youth Justice Health Advisory Group.
Thank you. Dr Creety, could you likewise assist the Commission by setting out your background and qualifications?
Thank you. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a paediatrician and adolescent physician. I've worked at Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne since 2000 in the Department of Adolescent Medicine. I've worked for almost the last 9 years as a general paediatrician at the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service, 2 days a week, where about 60% of the children I see have had contact or involvement with child protection. About 50% of those children have been removed from their families at some stage of their life. Between 2012 and 2014, I was head of the medical services 5 days a week at Parkville Youth Justice Precinct, where I was responsible for the health care of, not the mental health, but the physical health care of the children in custody there. And in 2016, I gave evidence at the Royal Commission in Darwin, the Commission for Protection and Detention of Children in the Northern Territory, really to give evidence about the medical standards, the standards of medical care of children in detention.
Now, thank you. Now, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to some of the understandings you have, Professor Kinner, in relation to the characteristics of First Nations people in the criminal justice system.
Broad overview would be to say that First Nations people in the criminal justice system are that subset of First Nations people in the Australian community who are distinguished by particularly significant health and social needs. So I don't want to get into the weeds of percentages and numbers, but we know that the prevalence of mental illness is extraordinarily high, the prevalence of cognitive disability, substance use difficulties, particularly in relation to alcohol, cannabis, and very importantly also tobacco, and the prevalence of chronic, communicable and non-communicable diseases are increased. So, for example, hepatitis C, sexually transmitted infections, less of an issue, but still an issue, and probably getting the least attention, but also very important, a markedly increased risk of chronic non-communicable diseases, things like cancer, diabetes, asthma, which are associated with very poor long-term outcomes. Critically, we know that these health and health-related conditions typically co-occur among both First Nations and non-Indigenous people in custody. In other words, people typically have multiple health problems at the same time, what you can call multimorbidity. That's really important because we know that to effectively treat people with co-occurring conditions, you need a multidisciplinary coordinated team.
Thank you. And in particular, a focus of some of your work has been the relationship between incarceration and post-release mortality.
So we've led a number of studies in Australia which unfortunately align very well with international evidence showing that people released from custody are at dramatically increased risk of death from preventable causes. Just to put this in context, since the Royal Commission in 1991, we've had monitoring of deaths in custody, and of course the number of deaths in custody should be zero. But just for context, we've done some work recently showing that the number of deaths within a year of release from prison in Australia is about 10 times the number of deaths in custody each year. And whereas most of the deaths in custody now are due to natural causes, and of course we can talk about medical negligence, the vast majority of deaths in people released from prison, particularly in the weeks and months immediately following release, are from preventable causes, so suicide, drug overdose, violence and injury. So there's an enormous under-recognised burden of ill health and mortality, and death is very much the tip of the iceberg in those poor outcomes that we see.
Mm. So
straight away, what the proportion is as between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal with respect to post-release death?
So the work that we've done, we developed a system that the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare now uses to routinely monitor deaths after release from prison. And what that has shown is that the rates of death for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people after release from prison are about the same. And this, of course, reminds us of one of the findings of the Royal Commission in 1991, which is that the rates of death in prison are similar, but given the extraordinary overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prison and the very extraordinary overrepresentation of Indigenous people released from prison, there's a concentration of increased risk in Indigenous people in that period after release from prison.
Thank you. Professor Kinner, I just want to take you to paragraph 6 of your outline. In that paragraph, you identified that Indigenous women released from prison are at approximately 13 times higher risk of death post-release compared to their counterparts from the general population. I mean, that's a quite extraordinary figure. Would you agree?
It's an appalling figure. It's an absolute tragedy. These are clearly highly marginalised women. And again, there are two parts to this. Clearly, there's a desperate need for greater support. But secondly, what we now know increasingly is that a lot of the women that we see at risk after release from prison were at risk before they went to prison in the first place. So that begs the question, what do we need to do about that? Sending people to prison is not a solution to any of those risks, but not sending them to prison in and of itself is not sufficient to mitigate those risks.
Can I just ask, this is aggregate Australian data. Do you have any data, I know the numbers might be too small, disaggregated to Victoria, or is the pattern similar in Victoria as it is to other states?
So I've led research on this issue in Queensland. There have been studies in New South Wales and in Western Australia. The first study on this issue in Australia actually was in Victoria, led by Graham, 2003, but only using coronial records. And there hasn't been, to my knowledge, any research on this specific to Victoria since that time. The AHW data that I mentioned do cover all Australian states and territories and could be disaggregated. Without going into the weeds of this, that's not a gold standard way of looking at mortality. It's actually exclusively using Centrelink data, which is only possible because nearly everyone released from prison gets a crisis payment. Rates of employment are so low, you can follow people through those crisis payments, and Centrelink is very diligent in terminating benefits when people pass away. So,
Thank you. Dr. Creedy, you've also done some work in helping to build some picture around the incarcerated population, and in particular with respect to children. You've put together, in your statement at least, a profile of children in the justice system. Can you just speak to the commissioners about that?
Yeah, so if we go to paragraph 24 of my statement, I think that's probably, from my work in this area, really since Dondale, I think there's a lot better understanding of the profile of children in the custody system, and that's important because that should be driving the interventions or the support we need for children. So we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are overrepresented in the justice system. If we look at Australian population data, maybe 3 to 4% of Australia's population may identify as First Nations people. We know in the adult prison system it's about 30% of the prison population is First Nation people. If we look at the prison population, and I'll call youth justice and prison interchangeably, but if we look at the population incarcerated under the age of 14 years of age, it's about 60 to 70% of children incarcerated under that age are Indigenous. So the younger the cohort, the higher the percentage of Indigenous people incarcerated. So we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are overrepresented. Children in custody involved in the justice system come from lower socioeconomic groups. If you break socioeconomic profile down by quintile, so bottom 20% of children from the bottom 20% socioeconomically are 8 to 10 times more likely to be involved in the justice system. So it's not just an issue of Aboriginality, they go hand in hand, Aboriginality and disadvantage at times. So we know that the children who are incarcerated are young and neurodevelopmentally immature, and there's a slide I've got about neurodevelopment of the brain, but we now know through functional MRI that the part of the brain that's responsible for impulse control and seeing the consequences of your actions is not fully developed until you're about 25-year-old. So if any of you have got older adolescent teenagers, you probably realise this. They're still...
Dr. Creedy, we might have slide 1 shown on the screen, and I'd ask you just to speak to that slide.
Yeah. So these are like functional MRI pictures, and it shows that the part of the brain which is responsible for what we call executive functioning, including impulse control and weighing up long-term consequences of your actions, is not fully developed in your 20s. So even us as adults are not fully in charge of our impulses. You might go to the supermarket, there might be chocolates in the trolley, and you don't want to buy them, but impulsively, we all do things impulsively, but a 10 to 12-year-old will be much more impulsive and not think through the consequences of his actions or her actions. So I've seen a lot of kids being incarcerated on remand for getting in a stolen car, for example. The 12-year-olds on the side of the road, that get pressured to jump in the car or get left on the side of the road. They jump in the car, not thinking through the consequences of the action. Because the car's stolen, they're an accessory to a crime, and that's sufficient to incarcerate someone through behaviour which is completely understandable on the basis of their neurocognitive development at that age.
So in terms of this slide, Dr. Creedy, there's a small box on the top right-hand corner of those images,
Yes.
and that's the...
Prefrontal. It represents the prefrontal cortex.
And we can see that colour starts out largely red, and moves to a less red colour at the
Older age, yeah. So if you see the spectrum along the bottom, red, yellow is parts of the brain, less fully mature, blue is fully mature. So it is the part of the brain that's latest to develop. And we know that part of the brain is responsible for giving you control over your impulses and thinking through actions.
And so even at the age of 20, there's still
It's not fully developed.
not fully developed. And the development of the brain, particularly in respect of those functions, is affected by trauma?
Other parts of the brain are affected by trauma, yeah. It is interesting that for children who are traumatised from a very young age, even intra-utero exposure to trauma before you're born, the synapses, the brain linkages which develop are affected by trauma, high cortisol levels in utero even, which might be maternal trauma, and it affects that part of the brain which lets you calm down. So you're more likely to have a fight and flight response if you've had early childhood trauma. So as an example, as an adult, if I have a police car come behind me and the lights flash, boop, 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 I get scared, but I've got enough impulse control to calm down. A young person who's had trauma won't have those neuron connections as formed, and they may hit the accelerator and go off, and then they'll be charged with evading police. So there's a lot of so that any conflict or pressure, they may react in a way which will bring them in contact with the police and be able to be charged. And we know that early childhood trauma affects those neuronal networks which allow you to just slow down, take your time and not do something which may get you in trouble with the police. And that's particularly important in this case because if we go to, there's another slide about if we accept involvement with child protection as a proxy for trauma, we know that the children in the justice system are very traumatised. So there's another slide 3. Slide 3, which shows the rate from Victoria of the rates of your likelihood of being child protection involved at your first involvement at youth justice. And it's not until 14 years of age that it's a less than 50% chance that you've been involved with child protection if you're involved with youth justice. And we know that even 1 in 4 children under the age of 14 involved in child protection have even been in residential care, which is the extreme end of the child protection placement system. So this and the trauma is threefold. It's the trauma for which they are removed. And if we look at the evidence from Task Force 1000, high rates of violence in the home, high rates of parental mental health, and high rates of parental drug and alcohol use. So they've been removed because of trauma. They've had the trauma of being removed. Second trauma, and being removed from your parents is, of course, traumatic. And then they have the trauma often of being in the child protection system and having multiple placements. I've had an 11-year-old with 30 placements over her time, and she's involved in the justice system. So there's that what I call the triple trauma of being involved in the child protection system. Trauma for the reason behind removed, trauma of being removed, and then the trauma of the multiple placements and attachment issues which come inherent in a lot of placements in the child protection system.
Thank you, Dr. Creedy. So returning back to paragraph 24.
Yeah, sorry, I've gone off piste a bit there. Neurodevelopmentally immature, then high rates of trauma, which we've discussed, high rates of mental health issues, and although I don't know specific data from Victoria, there was a research undertaken in Western Australia, and if we can refer to slide 2, they're done through the Telethon Institute. 99 children in detention in Western Australia. Some researchers went in and found 89% of the children in detention, and children under the age of 18, had at least one severe neurodevelopmental impairment, and that's the list of the impairments or issues. So fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, ADHD, depression, learning difficulties, intellectual disability, trauma, attachment anxiety, speech and language disorder. Those figures are shocking in themselves. So we're locking up children for behaviours which are largely explained by disability. So rather than supporting the disability, we're locking them up.
Returning back to 24,
Yes.
the other item that you've identified as part of the profile of children in the criminal justice system is at E, low rates of mental health diagnoses.
Yes.
So not only are they suffering from the mental health conditions, but they're not being treated as people with those conditions.
Never been assessed. And that's really appalling, because many of these have been through the child protection system, and there's been ample opportunities, and we could get to that later, about using involvement in child protection as an opportunity or a flag to appropriately assess these children for their disability, behaviour, mental health, and put in supports earlier before that trajectory into the justice system. So it's a really missed opportunity that they've got into the system, the justice system, without, rather than being through the child protection system, as we've seen, but never been assessed.
We're going to have a bit of a closer look at the way in which there might be a health response to this behaviour. But Professor Kinner, is there something that you would add to the observations from Dr. Creedy?
Yeah, just what may be a useful way of thinking about this. I think Mick and I have both been talking about what's been described as the sedimentation of disease. It's not a term I love, but basically making the point that the criminal justice system, for a variety of reasons, effectively filters and selects from our society the most marginalised, disadvantaged, unwell members of our community, and puts them in a place where we then arguably compound that marginalisation, trauma, disadvantage and ill health. Now, why do we do that? And just to give it context again, when you look at the drivers of contact with the criminal justice system in our communities, disadvantage, Mick has spoken to, rurality, like being in a rural and remote location, structural racism, disability, mental illness, homelessness. We know these are important drivers of contact with the criminal justice system, and then remarkably, not only do we often fail to identify the underlying health and social needs that led to the person being there in the first place, we adopt an entirely myopic, hyper-individualistic narrative suggesting that the person just needs to change their criminogenic thinking. And it's so strikingly at odds with the evidence and with common sense. So I think Mick and I have been speaking about this enormous burden of need, and it's really strikingly inconsistent with our response.
Thank you. I might just explore that issue for a moment before returning back to Dr. Creedy. In your work, have you had cause to consider why it is, at a population level, why it is we're moving to much larger imprisoned population, and why we're pursuing this path, it seems, where we're locking up more and more people at almost an exponential rate?
Sure. I mean, I'm not a criminologist, but I think a couple of key drivers. One is a cultural shift to a more punitive conceptualisation of behaviours that lead people to the criminal justice system. And I think nobody's willing to take ownership of driving that. The media will say that they're communicating the views of people they speak with. Politicians will say that they're listening to experts but trying to reflect community sentiment, and community listens to the media and the politicians and forms an increasingly punitive view. That, coupled with increasing underinvestment in our basic social safety net and supports. And we know that the more we disinvest in those supports and the more inequality we see in our society, the more incarceration we're going to see, because this is a symptom of the failures of those upstream systems.
Thank you. Dr. Creedy, returning back to paragraph 24, the last item you have identified is that as part of that profile of children involved in the criminal justice system is that they are largely disengaged from school.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The high rates of disengagement from school in all the children I saw in Parkville and in data from every state I've looked at. Again, you could get to that. There's another reason, and very intertwined with the child protection system. I mean, I see children in my practice at the Aboriginal Health Service as young as grade prep who are sent home from 10 o'clock in the morning because of kids in out of home care because of behavioural issues. They've had multiple placements. They don't settle in a crowded classroom. So carers are rung to take their child home. So the child is excluded from school from a young age and has a terrible school journey, feeling unwelcome at school and excluded from school. The other issue from that is from the carer's perspective. We have a child protection system, I think, probably based on the 1950s model where there's an expectation where there's a parent at home to pick the kid up from school at short notice. And then if you've got kids, we've relied on before school care, after school care, and the stability of school hours to be able to work ourselves. A lot of the carers of these children out of home care who get sent home early don't have that stability. They can't work, so the replacement is relinquished, if that's the language child protection use. Child goes off to another family. Additional trauma we talked about before, multiple placements, more issues settling in the school. And if that's repeated 3 or 4 times, children often end up... I've seen children as young as 8 years of age who've not been able to be placed in family-based care, in residential care from the age of 8 because they've had multiple family breakdowns and the behaviour and attachment issues are so significant they can't safely be placed in families, or the agencies don't have families who can deal with that type of attachment-driven behaviour. So the carers need support and the schools really need support. Schools are restrained by their resources and liability issues. I would recommend that the schools are resourced to keep children in out-of-home care at school, even if it's outside the classroom, so they have a better school experience. Schools do have some funding under the program of Students for Disability, DSP, Severe Behavioural, to support that, but universally, it's not universal that it's applied for, and I still see kids with restricted hours going into high school, and it's just more traumatising for them.
Dr. Creedy, can I just ask, from your experience, when the child moves placement, they move schools again?
Often do.
So if
often do.
Okay.
Not always, but often do. Yeah, and exactly. It's another issue of resettlement and attachment.
And the disability, so a child has to be, correct me if I'm wrong, a child has to be diagnosed with a disability to get that funding?
So this under the Department of Education, I think it is, or DET, I'm not sure, but there are different streams for DSP. There's program for students with disability, there's intellectual disability, autism, but there's also a funding stream for severe behavioural disorder, and they can apply for that, and I often fill in the applications for that. So they don't have to have a diagnosed intellectual autism disability, but the specific specific funding under the severe behaviour category, severe behavioural disorder category.
Thank you.
Professor Kinner, you've done some work in terms of trying to map the trajectory of First Nations children and young people following release from the criminal justice system. Are you able to speak to the commissioners about that trajectory?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot that we still don't know and a lot more work that we need to do, but our group has probably been a leader in following people after release from custody to understand their health trajectories a whole lot better. More of our work is focused on adults. The work that we've done so far that's published with respect to children released from youth detention has been focusing on mortality, death. That particular study was a study based in Queensland where we looked at every young person who had contact with the criminal justice system over a 14-year period, and we looked at their contact with the adult criminal justice system and their risk of death. A couple of the key findings from that is that in that whole group of young people, almost 50,000 young people, there were more than 1,400 deaths. And, I sometimes stop and remind myself, try counting from 1 to 1,400 and remind myself that each one of those is a young person with a family. The rate of death in these young people is more than 4 times what you would expect of children of that age and sex distribution in the community. The rates of death are consistent with what we see in adults, higher among Indigenous than non-Indigenous kids who've been in contact with that system. 1/3 of those deaths is due to suicide. Other important causes of death include violence, overdose, injuries, notably including road traffic injuries in these young people, but even the rates of death due to non-communicable diseases in young people who've been through the system are around twice what you would expect. So again, the sedimentation of disease, it's the most unwell, at-risk young people in our communities who are put in this system, and what we see after their very brief contact with that system is often really bad news. We've found that subsequent contact with the adult criminal justice system increases the risk of death. We found that the more times they have contact with the system, the more at risk they are of death. And we found that the deeper they penetrate into that system, the more they are at risk of death. So children who've been in detention, more than 6 times as likely to die during the follow-up in this study. Children who are only ever charged with a crime, never convicted of anything, never served an order, still at more than three times higher risk of death. So the point here is that these are children who weren't really exposed to the system other than being charged with a crime, and they're still at extraordinarily increased risk of death. So that's more than 300% increase in risk of death.
Stark figures. Can I try and summarise both of your outlines of evidence in this way, that the system that is needed is one in which there's a health-based response to antisocial behaviour.
Yes.
You agree with that?
Yes.
And we don't have that at the moment in Victoria.
Not adequate. We don't have access to the
I agree.
to the resources needed to support these children, both from a young age and while they're in the system. I would say, as an observation, children do not go into the child protection system as criminals, but it often drives them into criminal pathway. It's clear. We don't have, if we look at that profile of children, health-wise, it's neurodevelopmentally they should not be locked up before the age, or charged. Even charges reduce the other. Should not be locked up or charged before the age of 14. We've got laws in this country, in this state, where children can wake up on, as young as 10, can wake up on Christmas Day in a prison cell. We have...
And just to be clear, given what you know about the development, the brain development of children at that age, you are opposed to that way of dealing with young people?
Absolutely. I mean, I see children every week who've got behaviours that could bring them in touch with the police or have brought them in touch with the police. I don't think, I'm going to lock them up. I think, let's get the family social supports. Let's have an assessment of where that child is at neurodevelopmentally. How's their learning? How's their engagement with school? Have they got a disability? And really get a better understanding of mental health. And I think that, to me, is the biggest lack of support, if you want to call it, in the health sector for these children.
So my understanding of both of your approaches to the children being involved in the criminal justice system, but also in relation to the way in which they're dealt with in the child protection system, is that their involvement in that system ought to be a flag from which then the health resources are brought to bear and to assist that child and the family.
Absolutely. And I think there's 2 flags. I think we don't want to wait till they're involved, but we want to wait till they're at risk of getting into the system, and that opportunity is missed.
Yeah, just, to draw an analogy again with hospitals, just imagine if we had a system where we failed to maintain good health in the population and that people who started to get sick didn't get identified or flagged and just got sicker and ended up in hospitals, and we had good evidence that sending people to hospitals made them sicker and more likely to come back to hospital. I think as a society we'd be quite concerned about that, but if you just replace the word hospital with incarceration, that's precisely what we have.
And so some of the things, drawing from both of your outlines, some of the things that might be involved in a properly resourced health-based response to these behavioural issues is, one of them is an embedded set of mental health services, and I think you speak to that, Dr. Creedy.
So I'll go back a step. I mean, I think there are examples of programs that have tried to do health assessments for children going into the out-of-home care system, and Pathway to Good Health is an example of that, where there would be an assessment by a speech pathologist, psychologist and paediatrician to look at health and mental health issues. That is completely under-resourced and not really taken. It hasn't really had in reach to the Aboriginal children I see. So there's a model. There's a model which is not being funded and utilised. And I think Pathway to Good Health at best was a welcome mat where they get assessed, but then they weren't linked. It wasn't possible to link these children to any ongoing services after the assessment. So the assessments are often there, but then referral onto other systems. So we need to assess children going into services. The mental health, I mean, I have a patient at the moment, she's early teenager, she is being traumatised in care, I would say abused in care in another state, in here, significant mental health issues, drinking hand sanitizer with alcohol, forms of self-harm. I've referred her to a mental health service 6 months ago. I haven't been able to engage her with a psychologist over 6 months. Too late. I would say this should have all happened much earlier. And, you know, I can talk specifically about the mental health service. There's the CAM service in this state, which is at high risk, which caters for high-risk children at serious self-harm. There is a federally funded service or network called Headspace, which, because of its funding model, can see children for a limited time period, maybe 10 sessions, because the practitioners will Medicare. Pat McGorry himself talks about this missing middle I've referred one person to Headspace in my 9 years because they cannot provide the long-term trauma-informed care. Take Two is a good model, but you have to be really at that high-end extreme self-harming risk before you can even get in there. The capacity for this state to provide funded, free, whatever you want to call it, mental health support for children who've been through the trauma. We know, we talked about the trauma, even being removed is trauma. There is no easily accessible mental health service for children in out-of-home care who've been traumatised by being in the system. And it's not until they're acting out and too late and then at risk because of the behaviours they're acting out of getting into the justice system that we have some traction in getting support for these children. So, yes, we need a health response. We need the health response earlier before they're in the justice system.
Do you have anything to add on that point of early coordinated mental health services, Professor Kinner?
Just to say, I mean, other than that, I agree with Dr. Creedy. I think this is entirely consistent with the conclusions of our group recently led the health part of a thing called the UN Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty that looked at the evidence globally on what we should do with regard to these matters. And I think, broadly speaking, it's applicable here. And it basically says, number one, prevention, investing meaningfully in community supports that are appropriate and trauma-informed so that children stay well and don't end up going down the road that Mick has been characterising. Then at the point of being at risk and contacting the system, investing more in diversion so that children don't start to penetrate into this criminogenic system, but also not to the exclusion of also investing in quality care for children who do end up in that system, including in detention, and investing in quality support for their ongoing well-being because 8 days on remand in youth detention is not going to fix a lifetime of trauma and ill health.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Creedy,
Councillor. Sorry, yes.
I was not aware about the limitation on headspace services.
Yes.
I understand you to be saying that the services are capped at 10.
Most cases, because the funding model of the headspace is that the psychologist will Medicare the client, and I need
So it's
to
part of a mental health plan.
Yes, absolutely. I need to do a mental health plan to get patients seen by a mental health worker at Headspace. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And sorry, Councillor, I diverted from your question. Do I want to see them embedded in the system? I didn't get to that. So if I can.
Yes, please.
The referral out process doesn't work. We have effective models even in the hospital where our mental health team for our eating disorder program are part of our mental health practitioners, are part of our team. So we don't need to refer out. There's scope for case management. We employ them because they've got skills in that area. If I refer to CAMS or wherever, I'm not sure that person's even got the skills in trauma-informed support. The child has to tell the stories again. I can't share the documents because they're an external organisation. So it is very inefficient and it's not working, to refer patients out. If we had mental health practitioners with trauma-informed skills embedded in child protection, and when I say child protection, it's the VACA and the community service organisations like Anglicare who do the day-to-day case management. I think that would be a much more effective model and many advantages. And like I said, it's really hard to get children into the care and support they need. And it's struggling, and I end up being the prescriber, and I'm not a psychiatrist. There's practitioners, there's psychiatrists, and in the country's rural regions, the supports are even less. And a lot of children in Victoria, Aboriginal children in Victoria, do live outside of Melbourne. The other massive limitation with the CAMS service is CAMS are generally, and this has come out in the Royal Commission, very strict on their geographic intake location. So, and children in the child protection system, our home care system, often get moved around a lot. So if they go from this area to that area and they've had CAMS involvement, CAMS close the case, I've got to re-refer. It's not even transfer. Re-refer. It goes through intake, tell the story again. And it is appalling. And I think the chief psychiatrist probably about 6 years ago, recommended that for children in other home care or child protection, there'd be soft boundaries within the CAMS system so the children could stay at that one CAMS service even if they moved out of regions. That's not universally applied within the CAMS system, in my experience. Change region, and they may even go from one side of Hoddle Street to the other, so they go from the Royal Children's to the Austin region, and starts again.
It's a very unsatisfactory situation, is what I hear you saying.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Heartbreaking, actually. I find it stressful. Yeah.
Speaking about the transfer of information and data, Professor Kinner, you've been involved in the research aspect with respect to adult incarceration, and you addressed that in your outline. Can you just speak to the commissioners about your concerns about the area of research that you're involved in?
Yeah, look, I want to distinguish between two things. One is research and the other is routine monitoring and reporting. So research is one-off activities that people like me do. The other thing is routine monitoring and reporting, which is things that government or other entities might do. Both involve the collection of data and the making of the summary of that available to people, but they serve non-identical purposes and the challenges are not the same. My experience is, having done work as a researcher in this space for 2 decades, a lot of it starting off in Queensland, but nearly around the country now as well as internationally, is that I have, with all due respect, found Victoria to be uniquely difficult to undertake this work in. for a number of reasons. I've found it particularly difficult to have meetings and engage with people in Justice Health, for example, to even discuss what might be useful. I've repeatedly had experiences where I've proposed research and it's been declined. And a key concern that I've articulated in my brief of evidence is that one reason cited for that is that it doesn't align with the department's current strategic priorities. Now, in my view, this is nonsensical because, let me give you an example. A piece of research I'm involved in South Australia at the moment is looking at rates of cancer in people who experience incarceration. Now, those cancers may develop 10, 15, 20 years after incarceration. So clearly that's not going to be a strategic priority for the Department of Corrections, but clearly it's an important issue. And so for a Department of Corrections to decline a piece of research on the basis that it doesn't help them with their day-to-day mandate is basically issuing their responsibility to the broader society, in my view, is very disappointing. And also, in my personal experience and view, all correctional departments are very cautious and risk-averse and cautious about engaging with researchers, but my career has been built on building relationships of mutual trust and respect. I've again found that particularly difficult in the Victorian context, unfortunately, and that's not to say that there's been no progress, but it's been a particularly difficult and challenging experience to do that. And it's a particularly, in my view, closed shop. There's a word that we've used to describe this, epistemophobia, or the pathological fear of knowledge. And I think, one speculation I have is that criticism at an opaque system is perhaps better than the criticism that will be levelled if there were a full and unfettered view of that system. So in my view, supporting and facilitating researchers to engage in this space and access data is important. But in addition, to have mechanisms for routine public reporting on health and health services in all places of detention in Victoria, not a research activity, but a routine reporting activity, is really critical to give scrutiny to that system. The 7th Director General of the WHO, Margaret Chan, often said, what gets counted gets done. And if it's not getting counted, in my view, it's not going to get done.
And the system for approval of research in Victoria in the custodial settings, can you just explain that?
Sure. It's a two-stage process. So the first stage is to submit an application to CVRC, the Corrections Victoria Research Committee, and that committee is not an ethics committee, but it considers a number of matters. And I don't purport to speak for CVRC, but they'll consider the feasibility, the resource implications on the system, security implications, and as I mentioned before, alignment with the department's priorities. Some unknown subset of proposals that are considered by CVRC, if they get past that threshold, get passed on to JREC, which is the Department of Justice Human Research Ethics Committee. I am a member of that committee, but I'm in no way speaking on behalf of the committee or in that capacity at the moment. I'm on that committee because it's NHMRC registered, which means that it's obliged to conduct itself in accordance with the national statement. And in my experience, we do a fantastic job. But obviously, we're only able to consider the subset of proposals that makes it through the CVRC filter. I have on a number of occasions suggested, requested and implored that there be greater transparency whereby at a minimum JREC has access to a list of all proposals considered by CVRC so that we have a sense of what's being knocked back and why, but to date that hasn't occurred.
Can I just ask, is it because it's the health is privatised and sent out to others? Is that part of it? Could that possibly be part of it?
Look, that in my view is an issue in Victoria. I can't imagine why that would be a reason for CVRC to knock back a proposal. Victoria is also, in my experience, uniquely messy, complex and disaggregated, which no doubt produces enormous inefficiencies and barriers and unavoidable opacity. But none of that is a necessary impediment to any of what I'm suggesting.
Thank you.
So if this commission, using some of its powers, were able to obtain the information about the matters that have been before the CVRC and been rejected, is that something that the commission could call on you to then have a look at and make some comment about at a future time.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd need to make sure I understand if I have any conflict of interest in my role as a JREC member, but that notwithstanding, I'd be really happy to. I think, more broadly, it would be good for that to occur on an ongoing basis, but even if it were to occur once to get a glimpse at what's going on under the hood, as it were, I think would be very helpful. Yeah.
Certainly the what appears to be an absence of transparency is not consistent with a well-functioning governance model.
No, and as I say, I think it's understandable for the department to be cautious and to not just allow anybody in. But I think with appropriate provisions, there should be a default position of supporting rather than blocking research, and I think there should be transparent, justifiable reasons for not supporting research. A particular issue is that my group does a lot of data linkage, so combining administrative data rather than doing surveys. And in those cases, the administrative burden on the department is near zero. So I think that administrative impost is really decreasing as an excuse for not supporting research. And I've had experiences where research has not been supported or where it's been very difficult for research to proceed, even when it's been research of that sort.
Professor Kinner, are you aware of any Aboriginal framed research projects that have been rejected or have not made it through the first committee?
Unfortunately, because I have no knowledge of what's going to that committee. In my role of JRAC, I'm aware of Indigenous-led and Indigenous-focused research that has got to JRAC and has been supported. But that brings me, I don't want to diverge from what the council's asking me about, but the challenges in getting the cultural capability of that JRAC committee where it needs to be is another issue. Yeah.
Another aspect of a properly resourced health-based response, it appears from your outlines of evidence, is access to the full suite of health services. And Professor Kinner in particular, you've made comment about access for inmates to the Medicare benefits scheme, PBS and NDIS. Can you just speak about that for the commissioners? We have heard evidence on this earlier this week, but I would like you to give your view.
Sure. Look, and this is a long-term issue, and I think that there's a whole lot of imperfect overlapping understandings, and the lack of clarity and agreement on exactly what the issue is has been a big impediment to reform. At the core of it is the fact that people in custody in Australia, prisons and youth detention, are considered to be ineligible for Medicare and PBS subsidies. And that's as a consequence of Section 19(2) of the Health Insurance Act of 1973, which basically precludes double dipping. It says if somebody else is paying for it, then the Commonwealth funds don't apply. Implicit then in that is the belief that the states and territories, including Victoria, are paying for that, such that there's no need for the Commonwealth to chip in. And so that begs the question, what are they paying for, and are they paying enough for it? Which goes to our question of opacity. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to lead a national prison mental health benchmarking exercise where we, through the chief psychiatrist in every state and territory, collected data on the number of, importantly, therapeutic, not assessing risk of violence, but therapeutic mental health positions funded and filled in each state and territory. And we compared that to the only known international benchmark called the Sainsbury model. And what we found is, with the exception of the ACT, which is very small, every state and territory was funded at a level well below where it ought to be. So we knew this, that there's a woefully inadequate, highly biomedically oriented response to mental health in custodial settings. Most states and territories, I think, were very keen to support this project because it was helping them demonstrate to their governments that they needed more funding to do their job well. Unfortunately, after initially receiving the data from Victoria via the chief psychiatrist, the Department of Justice and Community Services required that we withdraw those data, which we, of course, respectfully did. So we now have a national, except for Victoria, prison mental health benchmarking exercise.
Thank you. I'd ask if we could Operator, if we could go to slide 4 of the statement of Dr. Creedy. Another aspect of a properly resourced health-based response is, of course, the assessment of needs. And this slide speaks very clearly to the need that is understood to be there. Can you just explain for the commissioners what this slide shows?
Thank you, Council. So their data, which we generated from VARS, we published this data. That data comes from a survey of 103 children seen at the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service over a 2-year period, 103 children in out-of-home care. And these were the rates of mental health and behavioural difficulties and primary healthcare problems in that cohort of children in out-of-home care. We saw at VARS, and we published that, I think, 2019 in the Journal of Paediatrics and Child Health in Australia. So children from the age of 1 or 2 right up to end of secondary school. And the data is staggering, but not surprising in my experience. Massive rates of mental health, school difficulties, behavioural difficulties, developmental delays. So we generated that data by doing an audit retrospectively of the files, electronic files of our patients. So again, it shows the high rate of burden of disease. A lot of that's trauma as a result of their trauma, as we've discussed. The primary healthcare ones are interesting, and this data is, so the hearing, vision, dental in children in out-of-home care. And then this is consistent with data in New South Wales. As children get moved around a lot, the carers don't have actually time to actually get to know them and say, oh, they've got trouble hearing or they've got trouble with the vision. So these issues are missed and obviously very important because it affects their capacity to get to school, and it puts them behind educationally, which then we've seen it can be a driver into the justice system. So very high rates of primary healthcare and those other issues which are up there. We've again talked about the issues of getting access to these services. So there's 2 things where we could go from here. One is the very high rates of developmental delay and disability, which we now have a better system to support children with through the NDIS, and I think the community service agencies are actually getting better at recognising the need of disability and supporting children through the NDIS. And I don't know how much you know about the NDIS system, but between 0 and 7 years of age, up to the age of 7, you can get NDIS support for developmental delay, so it does not have to be a permanent disability. Over the age of 7, you have to have a permanent disability. So it's sort of over the age of 7, if you've got low IQ but not quite intellectual disability, you're not eligible generally. So it again emphasises the importance of that health check early, in that when children get into out-of-home care, to identify disability. There's another thing about data sharing and record sharing. I don't know if we're going to get onto that later.
Yes.
You can get onto it.
Yes, if you'd like to speak to that now.
Yep. So I had 2 anecdotes. Working in youth justice, I saw children who had an intellectual disability but were quite verbal, known to child protection to have an intellectual disability. When you assess children in youth justice, you don't have their parents or guardian there. It wasn't flagged that these children had intellectual disability come in, and because there's no shareable health record. So we were taking this young person's history on their health needs, not knowing he had an intellectual disability. So he wasn't telling us about his trips to hospital or his, So, and similarly in dealing with children in out-of-home care, I often see children from resi care who've been brought in by the worker on the day, who's really like the Uber driver. He might be on, and it's like sending your kids to the hospital for a health assessment with the Uber driver who doesn't know that child very well, or only knows them 2 weeks. So I'm making decisions about this child's health needs based on an incomplete history. Now, child protection often have multiple reports, from educational psychology reports from children, previous psych CAMS reports, previous psych reports, previous speech pathology reports, which may be in their system, maybe not, but I have no access to them when I'm assessing children at all, unless I email and can find the child protection worker responsible, who then has to trudge through Chris, or I think they still use Chris, to find reports, and then he may email them back to me, but he doesn't really know the child. So I have no access to previous assessments. So I don't have an idea of where that kid's function is, what their past health record is if they've come in from child protection. And I don't know what assessments they've had before. So I may be referring kids off for another mental health assessment where they've already spilled their story before, and again, that can re-traumatise.
So what's the point of having all these assessments if they're never collated and provided?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Commissioner. Sorry. I wasn't very good at hierarchy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's appalling. Now, if I go and use my credit card in Timor, the bank will ring me up. Yeah. So because I'm a valued customer to the bank, I'm at risk. I wonder what investment child protection has in these children. This has been a chronic long-term problem for many, many years. It was one of my recommendations to the Commission in Darwin, and they did put some investment in a unified health record and a shareable health record. What I would like to see I've outlined, so the problem's clear. Yeah, this kid's further don't know the story, further traumatised, and I'm making health decisions on inadequate data, and possibly not getting.
And there are reports probably that exist already.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not even confident that my assessments are shared. The only way I can share my assessments with the CSOs and the residential team is to email them legally to child protection case manager, because if they're the guardian, so legally I can only share information with the guardian, but not the person who's not the carer. Legally, it's a mess. So I would like to see some sort of system where a portal or something where I would have access to relevant documents and I could upload my reports. I don't think with IT these days you could probably get a grad student at the company to do it, but it needs investment. It is a severe barrier to integrated services, and not only you don't get the best health service, but I think it traumatises the children. I had one grandmother say her grandson had 30 assessments. I don't know if that's true, but she was, not another assessment. I've got to refer to CAMS. Yeah.
If I come to you as a mother and I'd had previous assessments of my daughter and I didn't give them to you, but I sent the Uber driver to bring her down, would you class that as neglect?
Yeah, absolutely.
Guardian of that child?
So exactly. So as a parent of my child, I hold that story of my son being to the dentist, physio, has he broken his leg? The parents hold that story, but the system relies on people with very good intentions from VACA, community service organisations, but they haven't got there's turnover, there's stress, there's leave. They're not consistent. The parents of children in residential care are youth workers up to the age of 30 on 12-hour shifts.
And they would be our most vulnerable in care, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One's in yeah. So the more vulnerable you are, the further down the system you are, because your placements are broken down, the less reliable, impossible to get the story. So I've got to make another referral to dental. They may have seen the dentist in Doncaster or something 2 weeks ago. The person that brings them in is the shift worker. It doesn't know that, so I'm referring to dental. It is appalling and dangerous and inefficient, and I think easily fixed with a portal or electronic solution, because someone has to hold these stories. I've had children in my 9 years who've had 4 people they call mum. And mum may know the story for the last 2 weeks, but she's not been given the story of this kid's asthma coming in. She's not been given it. She doesn't know whether the kid's been to the dentist or not. And there's massive fragmentation. And again, you can see that's why the primary healthcare issues get missed. And that's why the mental health stories don't get shared. and re-traumatises it. That's why I don't get the school reports. I don't see whether I don't know if an educational needs analysis. Every child in out of home care has to have an educational needs analysis on entering school, in grade prep, transition to secondary school, or changing school. I don't know if they've been done. So I'm spending time emailing the case manager, say, can you check if the ENA, educational needs analysis has been done? This is the day-to-day work of the health workers on the line, the paediatricians, and it's inefficient. It's at times dangerous if you're looking at. I don't know what the system in justice is now, but if you're seeing a kid with an intellectual disability in justice and you don't know that kid's got an intellectual disability and you're taking his word that he hasn't got diabetes, it's dangerous. Yeah, or asthma. You know, it is dangerous, as well as inefficient, as well as traumatising, as well as stressful. Yeah. So, if there was one recommendation for investment, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that, but it would be a shareable, unified health record, which is accessible to registered people who either the manager from the CS. So child protection don't case manage. The case management is done by the community service organisation, but shareable with them, maybe even shareable parts of it with the residential care workers. I'm making decisions on medication for kids' behaviour, anxiety, depression with the Uber driver, often, or ADHD. It's not best practice. If I put it that way.
Does this exist with respect to children who are not Aboriginal?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Any kid, yes. So yes, no, absolutely. Is any child in the child protection system, Aboriginal or not, there is no unified platform process to share health records, educational records, mental health assessments. No. And yeah, there was Aboriginal, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal kids in justice. I only see Aboriginal kids at VARs, but yeah, it's the same for non-Aboriginal. So it doesn't. Yeah, it needs. Yes.
Dr. Creedy, at the risk of over-personalising it, your role in this appears to affect you.
Right. Yeah.
And so you and other paediatricians, people working in this area, have to figure out how to manage this system, and that must cause difficulties for the practitioners.
Yeah, look, to be honest, the most stressful thing for me is placement breakdown, which can be prevented with support. I find it enormously stressful and sad that children's placements are broken down for behavioural issues, or school retention issues, which could be better managed. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise with you both now the issue of intersectionality and the option for or the importance of having an educational lens or an educational response to some of the breakdowns that we see for these kids and their families. It's often the case that kids who are caught up in the system then suffer through lack of access to education. That's correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And you're aware that there are some programs internationally that focus have an educational response rather as opposed to, say, a health response as being the real focus of assistance for young people who engage in the criminal justice system?
I think that as opposed to is the difficulty there. There's a common mistake that we make when we think about solutions to these wicked problems, which is a system-centric response. Should it be a health system or a justice system or an education system issue? If we're thinking about the well-being of young people who have educational and health needs and disability needs, we need to think about orienting a coordinated system around those young people. So I think it would be a mistake to say education rather than or as opposed to health, but rather how can we have a coordinated response to this young person's various needs and achieve the best life outcomes we can for them. So certainly I wouldn't encourage any kind of either or thinking about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Don't want like the dichotomy of debate in America about gun control. Is it mental health? Is it gun control? It's both. And if you look at some really successful public health interventions in this country. They're on the back of lots of incremental changes, like smoking, or road toll is a good example. You know, smoking, pricing, legislation, access, zones. So we can't, it's not one or the other. There's no silver bullet. We need to address, we know the drivers. We need to address each of those in proportion to the impact. The road toll's the same, safer cars, seat belts, speed limits, speed cameras, alcohol. So there's not one or the other, Council. It is, as Professor Kinner was saying, it's about looking at what are the drivers, and we know them. Aboriginal labour involvement, get the communities involved in the solution. Support the schools. Child protection, why they don't go in as criminals, they come out. And all those things we talked about, stability of placement, record sharing. So I think that understanding the profile drives the interventions and not causing damage by punitive responses by locking up young kids. So support and not further damaging, care support and treatment, not punishment. And this state has a vulnerability framework, and we have a criminal framework. We need to decide which one of those frameworks we're going to use. And it's, yeah.
Thank you. That concludes the questions I have, but I would like to offer each of you the opportunity to make any further observations, given that we haven't touched on all of the matters in each of your respective outlines. Professor Kinner?
Thanks very much for the opportunity. Just building back on what Dr. Creedy was saying before, we need to recognise that criminal justice settings, prisons, youth detention centres are a setting through which marginalised young people in our communities pass. It's a blip in their lives, and the question is, should they be there? And if they are there, what do we do about it? With respect to take an example, Dr. Creedy's comments about information sharing and having a shared health record is a sensible solution to a problem that possibly shouldn't exist. The WHO for more than a decade now has been encouraging all countries to have healthcare in detention run by a Department of Health, not by a Department of Justice, for multiple reasons, but including continuity of information sharing. Now, since the Royal Commission in the NT, responsibility for healthcare in Dondale has shifted from the Department of Corrections most recently to Danila Dilba Health Service, a community-controlled health service, which in my view is a fantastic reform. That's the same service providing care for those young people in the community. Notably, Danila Dilba cannot bulk bill for its healthcare in detention yet, but that's a separate matter. Over the same time period when that terrific reform has happened in the NT, despite there having been a review of youth justice in Victoria, responsibility for healthcare and youth detention here has moved from the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Justice and Community Safety, and most recently, in my view, appalling precedent in Australia, been outsourced to a US-based for-profit company that's been the subject of litigation for its quality of healthcare and detention on numerous occasions. So I see that in Victoria as a staggering case of regression in the context of a parallel example of progress happening in another state where there was a Royal Commission.
And so the equivalent response in Victoria would be to enter into some arrangement with VARS.
VARS or multiple community providers, basically ACHOs, the organisations that provide appropriate culturally capable care for these young people in the community are very well placed to provide that care, particularly when we're talking about youth detention, where the average time on detention for those in remand, the majority, is 8 days. Having a separate health service, do intakes, do assessments, and then discharge them after 8 days, building on what Dr. Creedy has been talking about, just makes no sense.
Thank you. Dr. Creedy, are there any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Children just don't end up in the justice system without a history, and or a journey, and I think we have many places to intervene. We've seen the drivers for children going into out-of-home care of parental mental health, drug and alcohol violence, so there's an opportunity to intervene there. Most children in this country who get removed in the first year of life. They don't go into that system as criminals in the first year of life. It's interesting to reflect our removal rates in Australia in the first year of life are 4 times out of Scandinavia. Why is that? They've got better parental support. So we have a risk-averse child protection system which protects children from their parents, essentially. We need to support parents to protect their children. I think we could put in much more support for parents to keep children within their families so they don't start this journey. Once they're on that journey, the child protection system's fragmented, further traumatises the children. Got multiple placements. We haven't really talked about often lost in this conversation is the care, the support that carers need, and we need to listen to carers. Why are these children being relinquished? I hate that word. Similarly, the school system, and similarly, if they have problematic behaviour, how we understand that behaviour in terms of their development at their young age, and how we assess and support children, so we can put in interventions to support them and address those behavioural issues in a safe and culturally safe way. Once they're in the justice system, there's health issues, but that should be a flag for further assessment and support, because it leads to further intergenerational disadvantage if they're more likely to go into the adult system. So, I would see, I wrote down, I think the mental health support to me, if we were looking at investment, it's the health record and sharing stories, because they're not shared. It further traumatises children, and mental health support for the young people, because I cannot get the support these kids need. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, are there any questions?
I just have one for Dr. Creedy. So the children are being brought into care.
Sorry.
The children are being removed from their families. Do you see the issue for them being removed being resolved whilst the children, or being dealt with while the children are in care?
Not really.
And so...
For the parental support, you mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes, but not always. I mean, I think there's some very good child protection workers who will look at that. And child protection will always go in, I hope, with the lens of family reunification if possible. So a good worker will support getting it, will encourage or support getting support for the families, parents, but not universal. I'm not sure that the parents or carers always get culturally appropriate support, because VACA, who will do once you're 18, you're maybe not eligible for all the programs at VACA, but you could be, and if your child's not with you, I'm not sure. So
That's probably a really good point.
Yeah.
Do you have to be in the system to get these supports, right? Yeah.
So I don't know. I can't answer that. I think that really would be a great bit of work for the Commission to look at. That most kids don't get. A lot of kids don't ever get back to families, and again, because I don't have access to data and other, I'm relying on the Uber driver often to tell me what's happening, or the I shouldn't use that word. Sorry, I'm relying on the person who brings the child in, who may not know the whole story, and I've not got access to the story.
I do have one more question that I wrote down earlier, but I think you've answered it. You spoke about the trauma of removal from home. Is that trauma of removal addressed while the child's in care? And I think you spoke to...
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, stability does help trauma. I'm not even sure that carers who are non-Aboriginal even understand the impact of intergenerational trauma on children. I've had to talk to carers. This child is acting out because of attachment issues. He's had 3 placements. Just sit with the behaviour. Don't confront. So even at that carer level, we've talked a bit that parents are the most important carers and therapists really for the children in their care. And I'm not sure all carers, and they're left, like I said, left out of the debate, have the understanding of how to manage children who've had a trauma history even before. And they may, if they could manage the trauma and not and see it as trauma-informed behaviour rather than relinquish the placement, that child may be more stable, less traumatising. So, no, probably is the answer to your question.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you for highlighting the issue of when, I don't think we've ever really looked at when people leave custodial settings, what that looks like, all that. So that'd be really interesting for the Commission to look at. So thank you for that evidence. Yeah.
Thank you. Fast as I went along.
No, nothing for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioners. Commissioners, I tender the outline of evidence of Professor Stuart Kinner, and that's document 9.1, and the outline of evidence of Dr. Mick Creety, and that's document 9.2.
Thank you. Those documents will be allocated the next exhibit numbers.
Thank you. And that concludes the witnesses for the Commission today. And the witnesses, Dr. Creety and Professor Skinner, might be released. If there's no other administrative matters, the Commission can adjourn to the next sitting.
Thank you. I'll just make a couple of comments for the closing of this session, if that's okay. This concludes this set of hearings on child protection and criminal justice system. And we've heard from experts, community organisations, service providers, professionals, advocates and allies. These witnesses have provided context on the current situation, shared observations, proposed solutions. Many have shared deeply personal stories, and I hear the anguish in many, the voices of many that have come before us. This is traumatic, of course, for those who are giving their stories to us. But these contributions are foundational to the work of the Yoorrook Justice Commission in order for us to have evidence to enable the kinds of changes that we think should happen in this space. Finally, I would like to thank everybody who's been part of this block of hearings. I thank Council, KWM, Yoorrook Justice staff, the witnesses who've come before, all giving us their evidence in such a gracious way. And I would like to thank everybody who has been watching, people who've been on the live stream, and just to say thanks again to staff, Council and the Yoorrook Justice Commission team that's supported this, and people who have come and watched with us in the hearings as well. So thank you all. This hearing of the Yoorrook Justice Commission is now closed. Thank you.